I know that we had some big-time matchups in terms of the Nuggets-Lakers and Knicks 76ers, but this is my show, and I wanted to actually start off with what I thought was the most entertaining game of the first round of the playoffs, or the first weekend of the playoffs, and that was with the Pelicans Thunder in the Western Conference, so we're going to be starting there. A lot of these games in the NBA playoffs this round weren't necessarily all too competitive, but this is one that went down to the exact final moments of the game, and I thought that it was incredibly entertaining. I know that it was a pretty low-scoring game. Some of the offensive execution wasn't necessarily at 100%, but this was an extremely competitive game between two young cores in the Thunder and Pelicans that don't necessarily have a ton of postseason experience, but here they are, and definitely at times it did look like that, and yet it was still a very high-quality game. Some of the defensive efforts in this game we are absolutely going to be giving our praise to, but this was just an incredible atmosphere and environment. The Oklahoma City crowd absolutely showed out to this one. It's good to see. The Thunder are, I think, a little bit of an underrated fan base in terms of it feels like it has this extra juice when the Thunder are a part of it. I know that a lot of people overlook the Thunder, but this was a great coming out party for them. They end up winning this game 94-92. They actually went 5 consecutive minutes late in that fourth quarter where they were unable to make a field goal, but like I sort of alluded to, this game was an absolute rock fight, and the Pelicans just couldn't capitalize, where you saw, again, first example here of one of the defensive efforts was Lou Dort of the Thunder and the masterful job he did against Brandon Ingram on the other end. Ingram is somebody who typically, with his length, and not that he's an elite ball handler necessarily, but he is just one of those players that is so good at getting to his spot, and Dort was all up in his grill, forcing him into difficult shots, forced an offensive foul late in that game as well. Ingram was just 1 of 5 in the fourth quarter, had just 12 points on the night as a whole, going 5 of 17 from the field. So Lou Dort was able to really sort of lock down in these key possessions late for the Thunder, and also for the Thunder, coming up big for them was their MVP candidate, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who made a statement for this Thunder team that was stagnant late in the game. He had a really tough pull-up shot on the elbow over Herb Jones with about a minute and a half left. That actually broke the ice for them. And then the next possession, he got CJ McCollum on a switch. He took it inside and was able to hit this really difficult floater, and one that essentially became the game winner. And I thought that it was just a really gutsy performance from SGA, who at one point in that fourth quarter looked like he was sort of unraveling, had 3 straight turnovers, some of them very tough at that, but he was able to sort of collect himself and come up with the biggest plays when the game called for it. And, again, turnovers on 3 straight possessions for Oklahoma City. This is a scenario where New Orleans, they had a chance to capitalize. Their defense was really firing, but they were unable to capitalize on the offensive end. During this stretch here with the Shai turnovers, they actually had 2 extremely careless turnovers themselves, with Herb Jones getting called for an illegal screen, and Larry Nance, after the team came up with a stop, he gets the rebound and then sort of flicks it to Trey Murphy, who is out of bounds in their own backcourt. So hurt them a lot in that instance. But some additional notes here on the Thunder in this one. SGA led them in scoring with 28 points. I mentioned Lou Dort's defense. I thought that he and Jalen Williams both did a really incredible job of providing a lot of those spark hustle plays that set the tone, especially coming out in that second half where, it looked like a couple of times in that third quarter the Thunder were going to be able to run away, but the Pelicans are also a very tough team themselves, and they were able to keep things in check there. I thought that Chet Holmgren had a little bit of a weird game in this one, where he started the game 1 of 7, and he eventually got himself going offensively a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball, because I do think he's going to be under a little bit of a microscope in these playoffs, considering how tough that some of these Western conferences can be in terms of their big man play. So again, he is going to be somebody that is really looked at through this set of playoff games, and I thought that one-on-one he held up against Valanciunas fine. We already know he's a great backside defender, coming in on help defense in the post to be able to affect shots. I think he ended up blocking 5 shots in this game, if I remember correctly. And again, I thought that he did fine on Valanciunas, but offensive rebounding or defensive rebounding from the Thunder's perspective is going to be massive for them, because really that's how the Pelicans were able to stay in this game, was because of the fact that Jonas Valanciunas and the rest of the Pelicans were able to gather so many extra opportunities for themselves. Valanciunas had 9 offensive rebounds himself. The team had 18 on the night as a whole, and I thought that that was something that I don't really know if they have the personnel to sort of make those adjustments. It's, as we know, something that in the offseason they're probably going to have to look into. But as things currently stand, Chet Holmgren is just about their only center that, the other Jalen Williams got some minutes in this game as well. We know that he can space the floor out a little bit more, but he's not necessarily that defensive presence that the Thunder need as things currently stand. Sort of tangentially on this type of idea, I thought that the minutes management, especially late in the game for Jonas Valanciunas, was a little bit interesting. We saw both in the play-in tournament game against the Lakers, and now this game, Valanciunas is on the outs when it comes to these crunch time moments. I thought he should have been in the game against the Lakers on that final defensive possession where Anthony Davis grabbed the offensive rebound and got himself to the free throw line. But once again, Willie Green decided to roll with Larry Nance late in this one, and I'm not saying that's necessarily the wrong decision. Larry Nance, he does, operate at a little bit more of a high energy level in terms of the pick and roll game that he and CJ McCollum were running a lot down the stretch. Nance can space the floor a little bit better as well, and he provides a little bit more versatility. But Valanciunas also was just a force inside, and I feel like this is a series where two, again, up-and-coming teams, I think 2 great head coaches. I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot of chess here by making adjustments and sort of, I think that this series is going to stretch out a little bit longer. It's interesting because as things currently stand, the Thunder are currently minus 1,200 favorites on DraftKings to win this series, which I do think that the Thunder are eventually going to come out of this, but I think the Pelicans are going to make it interesting, where this was not a very good offensive showing from the Pels, and they're going to need to make some adjustments, as I was just alluding to as well. Second chance points are really what kept them in it. Also, the spark plug that Trey Murphy was, he's having quite a nice little stretch for himself. He led the Pelicans in scoring with 21 points. There were a couple heat checks in there that he probably would want to take back. But other than that, he shot 5 of 12 from 3. The rest of the team was just 6 of 27. So he gave them that spacing. I thought that his defense was also tremendous in this one, where he had 3 blocks. He had some other key contests. Specifically, I thought he did a really good job against Jalen Williams when he was looking to drive as well. Herb Jones, would have liked to see more from him offensively. I thought he did a really good job limiting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for a lot of this game. Again, it was a rock fight, and ultimately Pelicans aren't necessarily, despite having some good offensive numbers at times, especially without Zion Williamson, that side of the ball can get a little bit stagnant for them. We've seen them lose close games because of the fact that in those half-court sets. They don't necessarily have. And Brandon Ingram is definitely a bucket getter. I don't want to diminish him, but he spent about a month injured heading into the postseason, and that part is still definitely clear. And, especially considering that, he was in the torture chamber last night with Lou Dort just locking him up, putting him in jail. And, I think that it's going to be very interesting moving forward here in this series where, again, Thunder are overwhelming favorites. I think the Pelicans probably have a little bit of value in that, although it is a long shot for them. But on the note of Zion, he is currently how things are playing out. He is supposed to be reevaluated 2 weeks from the injury, which took place on April 17th. So May 1st would be when he would be cleared potentially, and that falls on Game 5 of this series against the Thunder. So in large part, the Pelicans are going to have to do it without Zion. What version would they be getting back of him if he were to return? But that is sort of a date just to keep in mind that they could potentially be getting Zion for, again, however healthy he is when that comes around in a couple other weeks. But other games here in the Western Conference, the Lakers and Nuggets, of course, one of the headliners where I thought that, this is a situation where everybody, I can't even say everybody because you hear a lot of people talking themselves into the Lakers. I understand that these are going to be competitive games, which I thought that this game was, but the Nuggets, when it comes down to that late game execution, I just feel like they are so well-rounded and so talented that what happens in this game does sort of come to fruition. Now, it was actually the third quarter really where the Nuggets were able to put themselves out ahead, but in terms of this game, for the Lakers, I did like the fact that you got a dominant Anthony Davis performance to sort of try and even out with what Nikola Jokic is going to give you on the other side. The two posted very similar stat lines where Davis was 32 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists, also added 4 blocks in there as well. Jokic had 32 points as well, 12 rebounds, and 7 assists. So again, very similar stat lines from the two dominant big men, but really that is the thing with the Lakers is when it comes to their star power, they are just so much more reliant on it than a lot of these other teams. And in this situation too, they got a good LeBron James game. I thought the Lakers did. He specifically did his damage scoring wise in the first half where I believe he had 19 points, but he just doesn't really have, in my eyes, the legs necessarily to be able to take over a game late, especially against an extremely talented Nuggets team, the way that he's been able to in the past. And I know he's had his moments this year. Most notably was the Clippers comeback where they came back down 20 plus in the fourth quarter thanks to LeBron James getting red hot from 3. But in terms of, physicality and that version of LeBron James that we saw for a decade plus where he was just able to get to the rim at will, that's not really the case anymore. He can't quite get to his spots as often as he used to, and that's completely understandable from a version of LeBron that's 39 years old, but this is a Lakers team that really needs him to do that if they were to pull off a series, especially against the Nuggets, where the margin of the room for error is minuscule. And frankly, this Lakers team just isn't, all that. They're not on the same level as the Nuggets in terms of talent. And I wouldn't say that this Lakers team is worse than some of those older Cavs teams that LeBron was able to, single-handedly carry on his shoulders to the finals. But LeBron isn't that same version of his prime self anymore. He needs a little bit more help. Again, 39 years old. We understand this, but the Lakers supporting cast, the real headliner in this game was D'Angelo Russell in terms of the lack of performance from him. don't like to overreact to game one, but he was really struggling in this game, which is concerning because he had this very solid regular season where he was proving a lot of the doubters wrong. Really, since December, he had turned his season around, but when there were questions about him and when there were trade rumors surrounding whether or not he would remain with the Lakers that he took exception to, it's because of the question of how is he going to perform when the lights get brightest like they do in the postseason. Last year in the Western Conference Finals, we saw him average just 6 points per game, and in this one, he just wasn't able to consistently have a shot. He really struggled from the field. I believe it was 1 of 9 from 3 that he was. And with Russell, going 6 of 20 from the field is just not cutting it. This is somebody who, is a very solid player, but through his career averages 14 points per game in the playoffs on 39-32 shooting splits. That's in a pretty solid sample size in 28 career playoff games. Now, this goes back to 2013. He's obviously a much different player than he was in his rookie year, but his rookie year, very inefficient, but he was at least, getting his points, which obviously isn't everything. But again, just to be saying, for as much as we like D'Angelo Russell when he is feeling himself offensively, there's also the defensive side of the ball, sort of the laziness of coming around screens and trying to contest shots around the perimeter. Just the lack of buy-in, it feels like, with some of those other things when he's not involved in a play directly. Being able to hustle and make the impact that goes beyond just the box score. I feel like that's never really been his reputation. And, it comes up big in a moment where he's making as much money as he is for LA and they have these championship expectations. It's just sort of hard to put all your faith into a player like Russell, who, again, very fun player to watch when he's actually on. And, I feel like we've had some awesome D'Angelo Russell moments through his career, but real concerns with him being the starting point guard for a championship team at this point. And we've seen him be able to buy in a little bit more, the increase in maturity as the years have gone on. But still, I don't feel great about that, especially when you're talking about matching up against the Denver Nuggets, who I haven't really talked about in this segment yet, which I know being part of the problem. The Nuggets are the reigning national champions. We should be focusing more on them. And I don't think I felt really all too different about the Nuggets coming out of this game than I have up to this point. Jokic is the epicenter of their entire team, essentially. Like I mentioned, put out a tremendous stat line. Not that double-doubles mean everything, but had a couple others, and of course the meaningful pieces for them in Jamal Murray, who wasn't even good from the field. He actually shot just 9 of 24, but he adds 10 assists to his name as well. Aaron Gordon was very solid, and Michael Porter Jr. was just a couple rebounds short of a double-double as well. I don't want to necessarily just run through everybody's box score, but Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as well, playing very good defense sort of on the other end and knocked down some big threes as the Nuggets made their run in the third quarter to sort of pull away in this one. And, I think that the Nuggets are still the best team in the NBA. I've been saying this, and I don't think that the Lakers necessarily have a great chance to knock them off. They'll be a tough out for a lot of these games, but I do think the Nuggets probably win in 5. That was my prediction coming into this series. I'm not necessarily, all too thrown off either direction in this type of game. The Lakers can play better, absolutely. Turnovers were a big issue for them in this game, so they can play a cleaner game and they can keep things a little bit closer. Also, the fact that LeBron was, I wouldn't even say passive, because I think that the Nuggets were also proactive in trying to keep LeBron James from sort of getting to his spots. But LeBron, only took, I believe it was one shot attempt in the fourth quarter. And again, we've seen that he does still have it in him to some degree to take over late in games, but they're going to need some other way to generate offense as well. They didn't necessarily have it in this fourth quarter, but last couple series here, which got some slightly surprising results. Neither of the games were particularly too close. I do feel like the final score of the Timberwolves game is probably not quite as indicative of what the actual game was like for the most part. They end up pulling away in that third, fourth quarter to end up beating them by 25. But Phoenix was absolutely in this game for a lot of it. But Anthony Edwards really got himself going in the third quarter. Minnesota, another underrated, I feel like, home court advantage this season. And once they started feeling themselves, you of course had that moment of Anthony Edwards talking his talk to Kevin Durant. And I'm not going to make a whole segment out of this, but I do feel like Kevin Durant just sort of smiling back at him. He is one of the most overhated stars in the NBA. Kevin Durant just loves basketball, and he was sort of buying into this Anthony Edwards run himself, and it's not like he wasn't, also performing himself on the other end. Kevin Durant scored 31 points, but this is also a Suns team that is just very top heavy when it comes to, I said that Jokic is sort of the centerpiece of that offense, but part of the reason that is because he promotes a very team-friendly game where everybody's always cutting, everybody is ready for a pass at any time. The Suns just don't have that same level of ball movement. It's a lot of ISO, and the Timberwolves are an incredible defense. They were able to shut that down, limit Devin Booker to just 18 points, Bradley Beal to 15 points, and again, outside of Kevin Durant, there just really wasn't all that much going for the Suns, which is pretty consistent for them. So they are a 6 seed that was actually favored over Minnesota headed into the series because of the fact that we saw regular season series wise, especially in that final day of the regular season, the Suns were able to take it to Minnesota, but as we know, I just don't think the regular season matchups really mean all that much when you're looking at the playoffs. And now things have since flipped as the Timberwolves, according to DraftKings, are now the favorites at -155. I do feel like they're going to be able to close out this one. Anthony Edwards, during the regular season, Phoenix was able to really, I don't know what specifically it was, but they were able to get to Edwards, force him to really underperform. But in this one, he's just built for these big time moments. He loves every second of it, and I feel like we're going to see probably him, I wouldn't say regress necessarily. I don't expect him to average 30 a game through this series, but he's also very capable of it. So I don't know, we'll see. Either way, I think that the Suns could definitely be in trouble. And then final game here, talking about the Clippers and the Mavericks. This is another one. The lower seeded team was favored headed into this series, being the Dallas Mavericks. They had built up all types of momentum headed into the playoffs, and that momentum died really quickly with this game that took place yesterday, where the Clippers just stomped all over the Mavericks in this game. They were more physical. Ivica Zubac had a massive game in this one, just sort of made them pay every opportunity. Daniel Gafford, there were times where he just got run over a little bit by Zubac. It's also an issue where when Gafford went up to play help defense anywhere else, Zubac was taking advantage and grabbing the offensive rebound. He finished the game with 20 points and 15 rebounds. And really, it was also just James Harden pulling out a little vintage version of himself. I see some people talking about the idea of, is game one James Harden a thing? Because if you remember last year when the 76ers faced off against the Celtics, he had a massive scoring outburst, and then by the time it got to the end of the season, he was not, the end of the series, he was just nowhere near the same version of himself. But this is a Clippers team that was without Kawhi Leonard. Amir Coffey was starting in his place. And again, Harden just went off in that first half, helped build them up a lead, scored 20 points in the first. I also really liked what Westbrook gave them off of the bench. And on the Mavericks side of things here, I thought that Luka was just never really fully comfortable with this game. He was very angry with both his teammates, with the referees. He was sort of an emotional version of himself, not quite sure what was going on there. He's somebody who has sort of been perceived to have this big time mismatch against the Clippers that just didn't come to fruition in this game. As we will definitely dive more into these series, but we are going to have to take a break here. So that is all. Again, remember, in the comment section, if you have any specific questions about these series, I would be happy to answer them. We're moving on a little bit of a time restriction here, so trying to bounce around to everything we can in depth, but stick with us. We are going to be shifted into the Eastern Conference playoffs when we come back on the other side, so we will be right back.